welcome back here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. It's the third week of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The two countries have had 4 rounds of peace talks so far, latest one being in Turkey today, but that too has failed and there's no breakthrough. Meanwhile, Russia's attacks continue in full force. Ukrainians are paying a price with their lives. Women, children, elderly have been killed in airstrikes in last so many days. The world is staring at a historic refugee crisis. Nearly 2.3 million Ukrainians have fled to neighboring countries to save their lives, leaving their own homes behind. Ukrainian president has clearly said that he is no longer pressing for NATO membership, the issue that has been the reason why they were attacked by Russia. Zelensky has also gone on to say that NATO alliance is afraid of controversial things and a confrontation with Russia, and he will not be the president of a country which is begging something on its knees. While it's crucial for this war to stop, the developments over the last 15 days have shown no sign of a resolution. Tonight, we will try and focus on what will it take for Russia to stop. But before I go across to my guest, let me first go across to my colleagues who've been tracking the developments very, very closely in Ukraine. We have Pradeep Datta as well as Jonathan live with us this evening. Good evening to both of you. Pradeep, to you first. Tell us exactly where you are, and the refugee crisis is now going to be very, very crucial because people are leaving their own homes in Ukraine and, trying to save their lives by going to neighboring countries.
Yes, right now I'm in Kyiv. That is the epicenter of the conflict, because even after 3 weeks, Russians have not been able to enter this area thanks to the wall of resistance that has been created by the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian army, because of which they have so far not been able to enter. But so far as this crisis is concerned, let me tell you, because if you talk about Ukraine, Ukraine is considered to be breadbasket of Europe. In fact, it has 5th largest producer of wheat, 6th largest producer of maize and soybean. And you feel so bad and sorry when you see those youngsters, elderly people struggling for one-time meal. Today, I had been to one of the districts, Bucha, which is 50 to 60 kilometers away from Kyiv, where actually the fighting is going on. When the family members were evacuated, I saw that how certain philanthropists as well as NGOs, they have raised some stalls where they were providing food. And many of them had not eaten for the last 3-4 days. So that's a kind of a difficulty that right now the Ukraine that had been supplying maize to 1/10 of the world and soybean and wheat to the 1/10 of the world. And today they are struggling to provide one-time meal even to their own people. And you rightly said the 2.3 million people have right now been rendered homeless because of shelling and firing from Russian side. Whatever weapon they have in their arsenal, whether it's a cruise missile, whether it's a ballistic Stinger missile, whether it's the aircraft guns or artillery guns or tanks, they are using every kind of weaponry, because the idea is basically they want to flatten, they want to raise the cost of war. The only way they feel that they will be able to enter. But I think that today's, in fact, all eyes were on the foreign minister level talks. Many of them thought that maybe something really good will be coming out. But I think the Russians have taken an extreme position. When you take extreme position, you will not be able to reach any kind of a conclusion, because they want the Ukrainian army to surrender. Here in this case, Russian had been aggressive. How come the Ukrainian army surrendered before them? So that's not really going to happen. That's one of the reasons that there was no outcome. But yes, only good thing is that they are talking to each other. Even when they are training their guns at each other, they are talking to each other. They have agreed to have the 5th round of talk between the negotiators between Russia and Ukraine. But yes, if we look at the overall condition, I too had a tough time today while I was covering a Bucha area. All of a sudden the shelling started, so there was no other option but to hide myself inside a trench. And then I saw that nearby gymnasium was totally in shambles. It has been converted, it has been shattered because of the bombing and shelling from the Russian side. So they are not sparing anyone. We have seen how in Mariupol, also one of the hospitals, though they claim that this was used by the military. But if you look at the visuals of those women who were expecting, and those were in a family way, many of the children buried under the rubble, 3 of them have already died. So that narrates the whole story of plight, trauma, tragedy, and terror that is going on in Ukraine for the last 3 weeks.
Right. Pradeep, stay on with us. Let me now go across to Jonathan as well. Jonathan, good evening. Tell us exactly where you are and how the situation is right now.
Well, I'm in Lviv in western Ukraine, which is still relatively spared from Russian attack, fingers crossed. But this town is now the de facto center for the refugee crisis. Nearly 1 million or so Ukrainians already have crossed over into Poland since the start of this conflict just over 2 weeks ago. Majority of those came through this town. So this town really is struggling under the burden of this refugee crisis. I want to go back to these Mariupol pictures because you're playing them. I find this extraordinarily alarming. I really do. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because the Russians are claiming that this building may or may not have been used for clandestine military activities. That seems highly unlikely to me. This looks to me like a targeted attack. This is Russia deliberately blowing up hospitals. And I'll tell you why this is so painful, because this is exactly what Russia was in the habit of doing in Syria. There is incontrovertible evidence, largely in the form of radio intercepts, that show that Russian jets in Syria deliberately blew up hospitals, civilian hospitals, in order to deny medical care to fighters on the ground, and also obviously as an act of terror to try and cow and drive to submission the civilian population. So if this is the new Russian tactic, then this war has entered yet another ugly and grisly and merciless new phase.
You're right, because hospitals are being targeted, and at the same time talks are going on, but we do not know where this conflict is headed from here on. And this is a phase that the world does not really want to see, because the refugee crisis is for real. About 12 lakh people have already left their homes, their belongings have moved to Poland. Many, of course, are waiting to leave everything and go to safer locations. We'll of course see what happens next, but for the moment, thank you very much, Jonathan, as well as Pradeep, for joining us here on Mirror Now and helping us understand how the ground situation is. So that was an update from Kyiv, the capital city, and Lviv, where Jonathan was right now, which is in western Ukraine, still being considered as slightly safe as compared to other cities in Ukraine. Let's now go across to our guest joining us on the broadcast this evening. We have Meera Shankar, former ambassador, live with us, and Maruf Raza, Group Consulting Editor, Times Network, also live with us this evening. Good evening to both of you. Thank you for joining us here on Mirror Now this evening. Ambassador Meera Shankar, let me begin the discussion with you. It's been, many days now. Airstrikes are continuing. Hospitals are being targeted. Refugee crisis is a reality. Where will it all really stop? Because 4 rounds of talks have happened between Russia and Ukraine, but so far there is no breakthrough. Today's talks that happened between the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine brought some hope, but eventually got us nothing.
Well, I think the good thing is that the talks are continuing and both sides have not broken off the dialogue that they are engaged in with each other. Having said that, it's difficult to really predict where this is going to end, because that depends on the key players. It depends on Putin, and when he feels his conditions have been satisfied, or if he is sufficiently blocked from achieving his objectives. It depends on Ukraine. Will it, enter a prolonged war of resistance with Russia, or will it seek to meet Russia halfway, at least in terms of Russia's demands? It depends on what the European Union does. It depends on what the US does. And do they want to see this crisis get resolved, or do they, seek to stiffen Ukraine's resistance?
Okay, interesting point of view there. Maruf Raza, so 2 points here. One, when his conditions are satisfied. Second, when he is stopped from achieving the objectives that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has. The question is, what are his objectives? Because when this conflict started, the only thing we, talked about was that he was against Ukraine joining NATO. Now, Ukrainian president has made it very clear that Ukraine is not interested in becoming a member of NATO, given the current circumstances. Shouldn't it then stop the conflict?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, because from the very beginning, if assurances of this nature were given, if not by NATO, not by United States, at least by Mr. Zelensky, that he will not be joining NATO, I think that in itself could have averted the invasion by Russia. Having said that, the assurances that he is giving need to be in terms of ironclad guarantees. Please remember, the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 had made it very clear that Ukraine will neither be attacked by Russia nor by United States. And if either party did that, it will be provided a certain degree of security. It was not provided by a signatory to that, and that is the United States, whatever the American arguments that it would escalate into a greater war. Then that means the Budapest Memorandum was a false assurance. Was it signed at that time on the assumption that Russia would never be good enough to attack Ukraine? Perhaps that was the assumption. The second point is that the Russians have now made clear three things. One is they want assurances and guarantees, and this is in writing, that Ukraine will not join NATO. Two, they want the three regions that Russia has laid claims to, that is Crimea, which it has occupied, the Donbas regions and the two provinces there that Russia recently recognized as independent states. All three of them, Ukraine must learn to live without them, i.e., accept that they are not part of Ukraine anymore. And thirdly, if at all, the demilitarization of Ukraine to whatever extent can be achieved. But under this kind of bombing and threats, nobody's going to give up their arms because they don't know to what extent the Russians will go. They have certainly not seen to be abiding by Geneva Conventions or keeping the war just and clinical. They've gone hammer and tongs for everything that has come in their way. And this is not what one expects from a country that's a member of the UN Security Council and is upholding its charter to maintain peace and security in the world. Yes, the Russians do argue, and rightly so, that why should UN charters only apply to them? What about America and its allies with what they did in Gulf, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and wherever else? None of those rules were applied to them. So this is big power rivalry. Ukraine has become a pawn in the game. But I believe there is still room to extricate from this pathetic situation if Ukraine gives these two guarantees. One is that it will not join NATO, and two, it recognizes these breakaway regions, which were anyway from 2014 under Russian control. I'm told even the local employees there were getting their salaries from Russia. People speak Russian language, and they have a leaning towards Russia, which is far greater than the people of Western Ukraine have towards Russia. So even if this kind of a buffer is created, I think it may be able to give them hope to pull out of the situation. If not, Russia, to my understanding, will consolidate its gains in virtually all the areas east of the river Dnieper, which divides Ukraine into two halves.
Okay, so this is about the conditions of Russia and the kind of resistance that we have seen from Ukraine, which I'm sure Russia never thought about before launching this kind of an attack on Ukraine. We do not know whether all these conditions will be met or not. But talking about the second aspect now, and I want to go across to Ambassador Meera Shankar first on that, the issue of stopping Russia from achieving its objectives. Simultaneously, of course, the talks are going to continue. I was just reading, and some reports are suggesting that a Kyiv official has called on Europe to boycott Russian oil and natural gas. US has already targeted Russian oil and gas, the sector which is going to hurt Russia the most if sanctions are imposed. If US has announced restrictions on Russian oil and gas, it won't hit Russia too much. But if Europe does it, the hit is going to be significant. Now, Ukraine probably would also want European Union to join US in imposing sanctions against Russian oil and gas. Do you think, given the interest that EU has in Russian oil and gas, Europe will like to do this to help Ukraine, given the current situation?
They would probably find it very difficult because these sanctions would hit them and their economies equally hard as it hits Russia. So I don't see Europe doing this. But what I do see is an effort to diversify and reduce their dependence on Russian energy over a period of time. I don't see that they would be able to impose sanctions on Russian oil and gas. And you can see that in the fact that the US has gone alone in imposing these sanctions because Europe was not in a position to go along with them.
Okay, so Maruf, what happens then in the meantime?
Well, Ambassador Meera Shankar has also been our envoy in Berlin, so she knows Europe pretty well. And I think I go along with her view that it's not going to be overnight that you can switch off from Russian supplies of oil and gas and Europe can start getting it from wherever. Say Qatar is a country that US has been preparing to step in place of Russia with oil gas supplies. But any analysis of this tells us that it's going to take a few years before Europe can shift its dependence on Russian gas and oil to elsewhere from the Middle East or North Sea oil or wherever. Now, the second thing is that Russia in itself, yes, would have damaging effects on its economy because of not being able to sell it to Europe. But at this point of time, weather being what it is, I think European nationals will never forgive the Americans for having put them through a very, very cold winter. It's still snow up there. And oil and gas is something people depend heavily on. There are two other issues that never come up for discussion, Heena. One is that why is the Russian army not being able to perform as was expected? That is, roll straight into the cities of Ukraine and achieve their objectives in a 2-week timeline. And 2 weeks was the timeline that Mr. Putin and his commanders had set for achieving their objectives. One is the determined resistance put up by Mr. Zelensky and the people of Ukraine. Historically, if the commander or the leader is in the front of the armies or along with the armies perform very well. From the times of Alexander, history has shown us that. And Mr. Zelensky will go down in history as a great commander of his forces. But at the same time, the people of Ukraine have decided to fight like tigers. And this has taken Russia completely by surprise. In fact, reports have come in that not only were the Russian army having many frontline units having conscripts there and not regular troops. For example, the Indian army has no conscripts, right? And that's why, given a chance, they fought like hell in Galwan and wherever else. But with the Russian army, when conscripts were there, except for some specialized units and airborne units, there are conscripts at the rate of about 25 to 30% in all units. Now, apparently, Mr. Putin has been very upset that though he had given orders that conscripts will not be used, they have been used by commanders and people are going to get sacked. But having used conscript, it has shown the Russian army in very poor light with the kind of casualties and surrenders that has been happening. It surprised me quite a bit initially, but when I did my homework, I found this was a factor. The last thing, going back to your oil and gas question, because that's your hobby horse, please understand that oil and gas is something which Russia can still get a market for in China, and even countries like Japan and Korea and others are also quite dependent on Russian gas, coal, and oil. So America can do it because America has now become probably the world's largest producer of oil, and its needs are served. It is looking for other countries to even buy oil from it, including shale oil. Russia will survive the sanctions in the near term. Where it might not survive, if this battle continues in the cities as a long, drawn-out urban conflict, then that will be their quagmire.
Okay. You know, I come back to crude again and again because it's going to hurt each one of us. Now, when the results of elections have also come out, the worry is tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, the fuel prices may be increased because it has set the crude on fire, literally. Now, let's move on and talk about another aspect that I want you to, focus on. That's about who can mediate peace talks between both these countries, because some reports are suggesting that China could be one. Ambassador Meera Shankar, where do you stand? Because Russia clearly is not going to listen to the United States of America. EU can't do that because it has got stakes both in Ukraine and Russia. So can China broker peace? Can India broker peace? First to Ambassador Meera Shankar, then Maruf.
Well, I think everybody is urging the combatants to try to resolve this issue through dialogue and to have an immediate ceasefire so that violence ceases and lives can be saved. But eventually, I think it will really have to be between Russia and Ukraine, and will also involve EU and the US, because some of Russia's demands have to do with Ukraine, but quite a lot really have to do with the US and Europe accepting that these demands of Russia are legitimate and that Russia is seeking a new security architecture in Europe, which treats them on a more equal basis than they have been treated since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think it will involve Russia and Ukraine in the initial phase. But if you're looking at a long-term resolution, I think the deal will have to embrace some of the other players in this. Now, countries like Turkey have been trying to broker peace, have offered their country for talks between the two sides. China has also urged negotiations and that the legitimate security interests of all must be protected. But I don't think anybody is as yet getting involved directly in the negotiations.
Okay, Maruf, I want to give you the last word.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Heena. I think the one country that is actually being pretty proactive and getting some results out of it, getting Russia to at least lay down their demands, is France. President Macron of France has credentials which make him a bigger heavyweight than Turkey. Turkey is a member of NATO, no doubt, but Turkey is getting involved there because the Black Sea area on which Turkey's borders are, along with that of Ukraine and Russia, is an area that Turkey sees very clearly also as a zone of influence. And Turkey has many other linkages with Ukraine and Russia that it wants to be seen as a player. But having said that, I think France has achieved a few things. France, President Macron has been able to engage with Mr. Putin on a variety of occasions and got back assurances from Putin that the nuclear facilities in Ukraine would not be damaged and cause a nuclear catastrophe in Europe, as was being feared. France is also a nuclear weapon state, so it's not a pushover. It's also a P5 member of the Security Council. And interestingly, as far as I can remember from my visit to NATO headquarters, France is not a military member of NATO. It is only a political member of the alliance. And therefore, it is not seen as a full-blown NATO-related threat to Russia's ambitions, as, say, United States is. So therefore, I think France has good, solid credentials. President Macron is a man who can get things done. And please remember, in a number of cases in the last 30 years, the French have taken a little out of the given context approach to a problem. So they didn't participate in Gulf War II. They didn't go along with the US and various other operations. So they've got a mind of their own. And I think they might be able to get to be seen as an honest broker.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Thank you very much, both of you, Maruf Raza as well as Ambassador Meera Shankar, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. It was wonderful to hear your views on this very, very important issue. We'll really see what happens next. With this, it's a wrap. Thank you very much for staying with us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Heading into another short break. Lots lined up for you on the other side as well. Stay with us.